Hey there guys, this is Obsidian Chill. Got another video for you today. This is a continuation of my updated in-depth guide series we're on to fire. As per usual, in the pinned comment in the comment section as well as the video description, you will find the timestamps to each relevant section of the guide. So if you're looking just at the precision side or the might single target or ranged or the tanking side, feel free to click on that timestamp and it'll take you directly there. So don't feel obligated to watch the entire video duration, but I always hope you do, just so you can get the maximum takeaway about the firepower set. I do want to add a disclaimer as well. I try to, with all my guides, to eliminate the movement mode powers usage. Sometimes it's unavoidable. When I can, fire is one of those ones as well, where I try not to use errors, try not to use tornado pull, stuff like that in the rotation, so that people, or if they're skimming or acrobats or everything, can take away from it. So let's get into the guide here. Okay, so in terms of a spec for fire, it's going to be the similar, if not the same, as all Might power sets in general. Weapons, it's going to be personal preference. Some will do more tap damage than others, if that's what you want to do. I choose two-handed. My preference is to have a weapon at least with a quicker lunge, so I can lunge to the next ad set. Super speed, if you were super speed and subbing a dervish into the rotations, then yes, you'd have the spec down to it, but if you're skimming or acro, you don't need anything. I chose to spec the power nades just for some extra power return because I've got the skill points to afford it. But if you don't, then they're not absolutely necessary. Iconic powers, you're going to need Heat Vision, Knee Venom Boost, and Robot Psychic. Don't worry about Sonic Cry or Freezing Breath. That was just me messing around with specs. Stat points is going to be super powered. Critical attack chance, critical attack damage, everything in might and power. If your focus is on tap damage and you put more into prec, I tries to go for more of a survivability builds. That's why I put everything in health, because this is going to be a melee spec. In terms of gear, you're going to want blast adapter in your weapon. Head mod's going to be, this is basically a choice you want to flip between. On a melee build, you're going to be using Fireball Barrage as a supercharge, so that's why you want to have that in your head mod. Single target, you'll be using Knee Venom Boost. Neck mod's going to be Escalating Might. Back mod's going to be Berserker. They do have an Accelerated Stoke Flames mod, but it's not as necessary because you're not needing it to clip anything faster. Chest mod, Penetrating Strikes. In terms of utility belt, because it's a melee spec, I'm going to have the Summer Vent Trinket, the DPS Trinket, and the Supply and Orbital. If you don't have the Summer Vent Trinket, you use like the Construct Bat or anything else. Max damage in the hands. Dashing combos if you're going to be super speed, or just tumbling mastery if you're going to be anything else. Artifacts is going to be the strategist card, transformation card, and the solar amplifier, kind of a standard setup for might melee. Augments, you're going to have might adaptives. You're going to have might origins. And then just because my base, which I normally aren't, I can show you offense are going to be might, obviously, as well. And because you're a fire tank, you're going to put health, and then which I can cover that more in the tank spec, but normally I would have power in these, but because I'm a tank power set class, I always have health. And then I guess I could cover affinity mod bonuses. You're going to have might in A and B. And then C and D, the DPS specs don't really have anything for C or D. I always pick support role ones. So there's nothing that's going to affect your DPS greatly in terms of type C and type D, so just go for an off roll. Okay, let's get into the loadout here. Okay, so for the melee loadout, we're looking at Spontaneous Combustion, Stoke Flames, Flashpoint, Fire Burst, Amplified Heat Vision, Fireball Barrage, and in terms of the artifacts, Strategist, Transformation, and Solar Amplifier. Now, the one thing that may stick out to this melee rotation is Amplified Heat Vision. That's something that you may not normally see run on a melee rotation, but it does work in this case, and I'll explain that why. So heat vision itself with solar amplifier on having the you don't need it. 200 is basically just the tactical power channeling model, which is helpful for fire. If you're not so much for the melee rotation because fire burst doesn't qualify for it, but for the single target one it does. But the main thing is that the explosive damage and then the setting up the burning. So even if I go onto the center target here and use heat vision, and then we'll go back to this so you can actually see the damage summary. So just that one heat vision, and then the strategist procs off it, that was 300,000 damage on 8 targets. That's just, I did 31k damage a second just with heat vision. So yes, that was on the higher crit side in terms of the beam. So it's just the fact that with the transformation card and have the initial hits crit, it doesn't matter if you're hitting one target. Once the explosion procs and you have that burning damage, you're getting, combined with the burning damage, that's 400,000 damage just with that. So yes, the drawback is that you're locked in position, you can't move. But the same thing, if you're melee, you're still fine. So that's the reason why I do run it. It is a very powerful power, not even for range, for mid-range, but for melee as well. It's just that usually there's another alternative, but in this case there's not. And then the reason why I run Fire Burst is for the strategist card. So for example, if we go back to Fire Burst here, let me just hop back on the 8 targets. So the spread's not going to hit everything, but so wait for that damage summary to show up. And you can see the strategist procking. So with that fire burst, that was 36 hits just from one fire burst. So for example, if you're using like mass dead or something like that, you're only going to get 8 hits. Mass dead's going to hit one target each time. In terms of everything else. So this is basically a substitution for Dervish. But the reason why I'm not running mass dead, I'm running the strategist card to proc on that fire burst damage is more than likely, almost 100% guaranteed, you're always going to have the strategist card proc on fire burst because of the multi-hits and because of the crit. So, 158,000 damage, 36 hits, 52.8% of them crit. The rough side was I only had one strategist proc there, but, this is an overtime thing over the entire course of a raid. And then the other thing is that Fireball Barrage versus Knee Venom Boost. Knee Venom Boost doesn't work as well for fire melee just because of the time. So you got the build up for Fire Burst, the dot damage. It's not the maximum potential. Fireball Barrage is. You have to watch that it is projectile based. So Fire Barrage of blazing fireballs. So you don't want to be exactly like in the face of the enemies, but you don't want to be range as well. So you want to be kind of within the melee range. So if you were like using Flashpoint, if you use Fireball Barrage right here, then you'd be fine. You're hitting all of them. So just kind of watch your positioning on that. But that is going to be in melee range. That is going to be higher damage running that over Neo Venom Boost. Neo Venom Boost wins out for single target. Because Fireball Barrage obviously was projectile based and with it not being the greatest single target power. Volcanic Calamity being 100%, it doesn't do enough damage for 100% to warrant it. So Fireball Barrage is going to be the way to go for that. And everything else, Flashpoints, self-explanatory, very hard-hitting power, doesn't need PI, and the Spontaneous Combustion with the procs, and the Stoke Flames to basically set up the burning. So let's get into the rotation here and show you what it's capable of. Okay, so you can get an idea there. It is on the power heavier side, but that is mainly due to the fact that I'm all spec health. I don't have any power my generator mods, but it's going to be on the power heavy side rotation regardless. So 57, obviously that's going to be lower because you got way less hits because you don't have the spontaneous combustion crits, you don't have the stoked flames, heat vision dots ticking. So your first sparks is always going to be lower, but it's going to average out because these are 10 seconds. So a 90k parser, that is very high for might and especially fire. If you're reaching 90k as might, that is very good considering prec is about 100k. And 40% that is on the higher side, but all the rest are, and it's higher crits anyway because of so many hit crits on heat vision and fireburst. So it dips down to 62. I ran out of power there and delayed my rotation. I had to take a soda, so that's why it was way less hits. 78, 72, 79, it's almost 80. So there's a bit of fluctuation. There are like a dervish rotation will be a little bit more consistent for sure. I haven't really seen any other rotations that have reached 90. But you will see some fluctuations, but a lot of it is on the crits because the crits will directly impact the strategist card. So this one will give you the maximum amount of crits that you can have, or not so much maximum amount, but maximum potential worth of crits. So you've got the stoked flame dots, you've got the maximum hits on 36 with fireburst always hitting it. You got heat vision ticks as well as on those crits. So it gives yourself the maximum opportunity for you to get the strategist card procs, especially Fireball Barrage. That's multi-hits as well. So it's one of those opportunities where you're hoping for the strategist card to proc, and that's where you're going to get the highest damage from. But this is certainly, like I've looked around a lot of the YouTube rotations, and this one I've seen mine may not be as consistent as some of theirs, but mine will certainly have much higher potential. I've tested all their rotations, and I've certainly never gotten as high as I have high as spikes as I have with this rotation. So there it is. If you're going to use dervish, basically you drop fireburst for dervish, and then instead of heat vision, you'd probably run like mass det to line up the cooldowns. But that's essentially what you do for dervish. It's going to be more consistent. I think it's going to be dervish instead of fireburst, and then the cooldowns don't line up exactly, so you need mass det just because it's got a low cooldown. So ideally, I wouldn't run one mass det because it's a low hit counter. Dervish is a higher hit counter, and then the whole thing is you got vulnerable to block and interrupt. But that's essentially what it'd be if you're running dervish. Okay, so now we're on to single target. In terms of a spec, the exact same spec that you had before, iconic powers. One thing, don't worry about freezing breath, but you do need heat vision, venom boost, and robot sidekick. Super speed, once again, you don't need dervish or tornado pole. If you want to take the power returns, you can. That's a preference. Weapon, same thing, two-handed. I should mention, if you want to worry about weapon tap damage and precision, take rifle. Rifle is the best for a single target in terms of grenade, because the grenade splits after 2 targets. In terms of a spec, super powered, all the crits still. Even for a single target, I'm still putting skill points into health. You can put skill points into prec if you want a weapon tap in between. I go for survivability. I can't tell you how many times in Elite I've survived while a DPS standing beside me has died to the same attack. Because, as a DPS, I'm sitting with 140,000 health in DPS stance. And that's not even buffed in by like Omega or anything like that. So I choose to go for survivability because a dead DPS does no DPS. But that's just me. But if you do want to do weapon tap damage for that little bit extra damage, certainly by all means do it. Spec prec, and then take rifle ideally for a single target. In terms of a loadout, we're looking at amplified heat vision, absorb heat, spontaneous combustion, inferno, robot sidekick, venom boost. I should mention, if you're in a fight that has a mobile boss, so like say like Phoenix Cannon first boss with Lady Blackhawk, you're not going to be using inferno because she moves around too much. At that point, you'd be using overheat. That's the only difference in the rotation. So it just depends. If the boss is more stationary, inferno will win out over overheat in terms of damage. But if the boss is mobile at all, you 100% have to use overheat because inferno will just miss damage. And in terms of supercharge, like I said in the melee build, Fireball Barrage wins out for melee, but it loses out on single target to venom boost. So let's kind of get into the rotation here. And that gives you an idea with the single target. So the first rotation is always going to be the lowest using this setup, because you don't have the heat vision dots, you don't have the spontaneous combustion, all the crits, you don't have the inferno dots always ticking, so it's going to be low regardless. That is on the lower side of low. I've seen usually around 40, but just be prepared. It's going to be low, but it's going to average out because that's just 10 seconds. And the next parts you see, when everything's ticking and everything going right, that is a high on the critical side, but that shows you what it can do. 54K is nothing to shake your hand at for Might, that's for sure. And then it goes back to regional, like 40, 45, 45, 44, 47. That's essentially what you're looking at there. This rotation takes advantage of the strategist card. Normally you wouldn't run this with single target. Normally it would be a damage loss on single target, and you run like the Grim or something like that, or if you're running the other fire rotation, which for single target you run like Lamort. But this one's built around strategist because I have the heat vision dots and the heat vision channel dots, the absorb heat channel dots. I have the inferno dots. I'm giving the highest opportunity for the strategist card to proc, and when it does on single target, you'll still be getting good damage. So the higher likelihood that you have the transformation strategist card is pretty good, because that's pretty much the staple for all DPS, precision, or might. So it saves you leveling up another artifact just for a single target might. But you'll see some people say strategist is a damage loss. It all depends on the power set and how you do your rotation. There is another fire rotation that I'll show that does do around the same damage. It's not going to spike up as high, but it's a little bit more consistent. You'll never see 30s with it, but it's super. I mean, it's pretty boring, and I don't like it from like a safety point of view as well. So that's it. 3 channels: snuff out, absorb heat, amplified heat vision, back to back. It's a damage loss if you do anything else, pretty much. So you're sitting in 3 channels all the time, back to back to back, off cooldown. You can't move in snuff out, you can't move in heat vision. So essentially you're just doing, you can run the Lamort in this case as well, but more than likely you don't have the Lamort leveled, but you're just doing snuff out, into absorb heat, into heat vision, then the snuff out again. Then the absorb heat, then the heat vision again, then the snuff out, absorb heat, and you get like a 44. I think the first one was a 37, but I mean, you could run that. That's perfectly viable, but I mean, not from like a safety point of view. If you have to move and can't jump cancel out a snuff out or heat vision, then it throws out the rotation timing. And then you got a damage loss there, but I mean, it does similar damage. It's just super duper boring, and you can't run Inferno, you can't run Overheat, Spontaneous Combustion. It just it doesn't allow for pretty much anything else. It's a damage loss. You have to be back to back to back in those 3 powers. So that's not something I would recommend if you want to, or you see other people running it. or people say don't run Obsidian, so Loadout, run that. That's why they're probably telling you that. But at the same time, I've got the numbers to justify my rotation as well. So it gives you that opportunity as well. Okay, so in terms of a range loadout, the spec's the exact same, nothing changes. Same thing with the iconic powers. I mean, technically you can use Freezing Breath in this range rotation if you don't like using Fire Burst or you need something that's max range. But it's going to be Inferno, Amplified Heat Vision, Fire Burst. Like I said, if you need to be max range, just sub that out. And then Mass Detonation, Robot Psychic, and Knee Venom Boost. The reason why you're not going to use Fireball Barrage is just that you're too far from range. It's projectile based. They're going to spread out. One of them is going to miss. Knee Venom Boost wins out in this rotation where you need to be melee to use Fireball Barrage properly. So like I said, the one you have to consider with Fire Burst is that you can move in and out of range. So, let's just take off Psychic here for a sec. So if you need to be max range and start, you can walk in towards use Fire Burst and then just back out. Like when you're using Mass Det, you can back out. If you got to use Fire Burst, you can move in, hit it. As you're hitting Mass Det, sorry, I hit Psychic there. You move back out. You've got mobility options. So even though Fire Burst is going to be a mid-range power, you do have the option to be mobile in it. But let's take a look at the rotation here. So you get the idea from range there. Basically just under a mil. You're going to have some parts that are going to be in the 80s. A lot of it is Fire Burst. The way these are spread out, Fire Burst is not going to be hitting the back one, so you're losing a bit of damage because you're not getting hits on that. That's why the hit counters kind of fluctuate there. So it's just that in a raid, that's not going to be like that because the tank's going to gather them all up. They're not going to be that spread apart. Like that's 10 feet of spread there, 3 different squares. So Fire Burst is just not going to hit those ones just because of the spread on them. So you're typically looking at just under a mil for range on AoE. And like I said before, if you need to sub out and use max range, Freezing Breath. So Inferno, Heat Vision, Freezing Breath, Mass Det. Then you have to tap out of Freezing Breath. So if you haven't used Freezing Breath before, 1, 2, 3. And then tap out or jump cancel, whatever you want to do. So we'll wait for that to come back. So Freezing Breath, 1, 2, 3, and then into Mass Det. Inferno, then Heat Vision, Freezing Breath, and then into Mass Det. So that's essentially what that would look like there. So if you need to be max range, then use Freezing Breath. Freezing Breath will be at max range compared to Fire Burst. Okay guys, welcome to the precision side of the guide. We're going to touch on the melee spec here. Now the spec itself doesn't really differ from melee range as a single target. The only thing that changes is what weapon you're using. So it's still going to be weapons expert, 20 in critical attack chance, 40 in critical attack damage, maxing out precision, and then basically you're putting all your leftover skill points into might and power. So leftover is going to be after you spec Neovenom boost and Robot Psychic. In terms of super speed or whatever movement mode you are, if you're super speed, you could take Vortex and Durish if you want to mess around with that in the melee. You could take Phase Dodge if you want to use that in single target. You don't necessarily have to at all. So really you just need to take the actual super speed movement mode itself. Everything else is just extra. It's not required. Now in terms of weapons, because this is a melee spec, it's going to be two-handed Doomspin. So then you're just putting the skill points to get down to two-handed mastery. You don't need to do anything else, which allows you to put some extra skill points into might and power there. In terms of gear, obviously it's going to be two-handed with a blast adapter weapon mod. Head mod is going to be supercharged Neovenom boost 3. Neck mod is going to be relentless precision. Back mod is going to be berserker. There is a back mod for accelerated stoke flames, but it's not necessary for precision because you're using it off the 12-second cooldown regardless. Chest mod is going to be penetrating strikes. Leg mod, once again, there's no leg mods that are viable in the game anymore. They don't scale, so don't worry about them at all. In terms of utility belt, because this is a melee build, you could use the Summer Vent Trinket in terms of damage, even though it buffs might. You could run the Dark Construct Bat. It's really your personal preference. But in terms of if you are going to be melee DPSing with Doomspin, obviously, the Summer Vent Trinket will be your best damage. And then just DPS Trinkets or Orbital Supply. In terms of affinity mods, I don't have Elite Gear and Test Server, so I don't change them. But Type A, obviously you'd have Precision. Type B, you'd have Precision. And Type C and Type D don't really matter for DPS at all. Most people take those for their off rolls because there's not really anything that is beneficial for DPS. You can get away with some stuff, but really there's nothing that's going to increase your DPS potential in Type C and Type D. Hand mod's going to be max damage. Foot mod's going to be Tumbling Mastery. Once again, that's a personal preference. Now, in terms of artifacts, Transformation and Strategist you're going to find on each and every build. There is some discussion currently in the community in terms of Gnorum Vernum versus Venomous Dispenser. I don't have as much experience actually raiding with Precision. I'm my DPS. I do this just to be able to show you the Precision side on the test server. I can see the debate between both. Obviously the Grim it's going to be standard passive damage. It's quite tanky, so it's not going to die. It's an auto summon. It also has 5% prick. The Venomous Dispenser, the buff does last only for 6 seconds, but you're reapplying it after 12, so you're only missing it for 6 seconds. The other thing is that powers like Neovenom boost, supply drops, the troll buff doesn't buff the Gnorum, where it would buff your damage with Venomous. So there's going to be a lot more opportunities for higher potential damage with Venomous, but the overall damage might be, in the long run, better with Gnorum. Just depends on the situation. It's really situational. There's not like a night and day difference between it. Don't get the impression that you're going to be way better damage with Gnorum versus Venomous Dispenser. So if you already have Venomous Dispenser, certainly do not go out and level up the Grim and spend like $250, $300 to do that. It's not worth it there. My only preference towards taking the Grim is that if you ever switch from Precision DPS in the future and go back to Might, obviously the Grim is going to be much more beneficial than it would be for the Venomous. Plus there's some situations like Ice Prec or Quantum Prec where you're running with the PI that the Grim can be quite helpful there as well. But that's just my preference. You can pick either two. It's not going to be a night and day difference between them. In terms of augments, obviously you're going to have your adaptive augments Prec, whichever DLC you're running, and then your origin augments are going to be Prec as well. Okay, in terms of a loadout for melee precision, it's going to be based around Doomspin, so you're running Spontaneous Combustion, Clip with Fire Weapon, which is your weapon buff, and Stoke Flames altogether, so it's a triple clip. And then Immolation is basically just there as a passive shield. Technically, if you're running into an ad field where there's a lot of AoE damage or splash damage, something similar to like the hallways in Phoenix Cannon, then you can clip all 4 together just so you have a shield up at the same time. Or it's just basically there just in case you need for a little bit extra survivability. But there's nothing really else that's beneficial to run in that case. Technically, if you're super speed, you can run phase dodge if you want. That's a little bit overkill, but it is an option. But really, it's just being a triple clip. Despite spontaneous combustion being 6-second cooldown compared to 12, you may think to run like in flame or overheat. I found the higher damage was spontaneous because of the procs on the explosion damage. And you get the idea there. Nothing really changes with, in regards to Doomspin. A lot of it is going to be heavily dependent on, was that my, yeah, that's my first part. On the strategist procs, as well as I think a couple times there. I know for sure on this 83k parse, which is why the hits dipped. I canceled Doomspin a bit too early on the first time. But you should see around 120 hits, 122, 120, 139 was on the high side, 132. That's going to be with strategist procs. And the spontaneous combustion procs will have a little bit of that, but there's not that many procs on that one, but the explosion is still nice on it. So you'll see close to around 1,087. Well, the first parse is always going to be lower because the grim damage isn't set up the same with the Stoke Flames dot isn't all the way ticking, but 93, 100, 83, that's the outlier. 97, 86, 105, 84, 100, 103. So kind of it's going to average out to just under 1 million in terms of stats, where on the higher side you'll see consistent 100k parsers, but that's pretty typical for what you'll have there. And in terms of having immolation, like I said before, you could just clip all 4 together, and then you have a shield too, just in case you need to have that little bit extra survivability. But that's essentially what Fire Melee Precision is going to look like. Okay, so in terms of fire single target precision, the only difference between this and the melee spec is going to be now you have to take Flare Shot Mastery and Explosive Shot Mastery. So you're speccing all the dual tree, and then you're speccing all of the bow tree. So that's the only difference there. In terms of super speed, same thing. You can only take the Speed Foresight innate if you want. Nothing matters. You're always going to have Robot Sidekick and New Venom regardless. And in terms of a loadout, you're going to have Overheat, Fiery Weapon, Stoke Flames, Immolation, Robot Sidekick, and Neo Venom Boost. More of a typical setup. Overheat is nice because if it's any single target boss that has an AoE component to it, for example, like any type of Clock Tower first boss, you've got the drones, you've got when they're frenzied and close together, you've got the final boss with the drones, so Overheat will spread that burning dot to them, and you get a little bit extra free damage. And then Stoke Flames. In terms of the range on Stoke Flames, I can kind of show you it here. It's going to be roughly mid-range, so it should be about, I think it's going to be a little bit beyond that. So in terms there, that's essentially the range you're looking at with Stoke Flames. So yes, you're not a maxed range rotation using Stoke Flames, but you're close enough that it's not, there's no real danger being this far away. Like any kind of, like Clock Tower Elite, Fire and Brimstone Elite, you can easily be this type of range away. This is going to be pretty much on the barrier mid-range. So if you want to be purely single target in the back, not have to worry about any range issues, and yes, you're going to lose the damage from Stoke Flames. Not that it's really consequential, it's just an extra burning dot, an extra clip as well. But that's about the distance you have to be away, which is going to be, what's that, 1, 2, probably 3 squares? Yeah, 1, 2, yeah, about 3 squares, which is, realistic, it's not that far away. But that's in terms of the single target. Okay, so you obviously get the idea there. Flurry shot is flurry shotting. The overheat has the potential to be higher damage, like I said, with the dot spreading. So we're at 41, 39, 47, 38, 52, which was nice. That was probably when I was properly flurry shotting. 47, because it's only 34%, which isn't too bad. And then obviously I stopped on the 12, so that's flurry shotting there. Like I said before, you just have to make sure you're in range to use Stoke Flames, but as you saw, that range is not too bad at all. You just have to be mid-range for that, and then you've got Immolation as you needed it for a shield. But, I mean, if you're super speed, you can use Phase Dodge if you want, just as a fourth power, just to save yourself a little bit of animation time on Stoke Flames. Once again, it's not required. You can easily just have the shield for some extra survivability. And that's about it, guys. Okay, so in terms of range precision, it stays the exact same as Spec itself as single target, because the only thing you're changing is now using explosive shot mastery instead of flurry shot mastery. So we'll go over the Spec again just in case. So in terms of weapons, like I said, maxing out the bow tree, maxing out dual tree, taking both just in case it's single target, like it's only one skill point. And in terms of super speed, you just take the innate, nothing else is required. Iconic powers, robot psychic, and Neo Venom boost. And stat points, weapon expert, critical attack chance and damage, maxing precision, and then putting everything else into might and power. So what does change is the loadout. So we got spontaneous combustion, clip with fire weapon, clip with stoke flame. So this is a power heavy clip, 200, 300, and a 300 power cost. This is more for in raids, not that really you range in DPS much time anyway, strictly build. But because the single target build has overheat, so you're getting a little bit extra AoE damage regardless. But if you find yourself using too much power, just clip a spontaneous combustion with fire weapon, leave that off, and then basically every other rotation are using wildfire. So basically, if you have enough power, you can do the triple clip. You can even clip with a soda. Like it's not that power heavy, but considering on test server, I don't have power gen mod spec or barely anything into might and power, so that's why it's a little bit heavy for me. But if you find yourself having some trouble, just eliminate stoke flames. But that's essentially the loadout there. So you get the idea there. The range is going to fluctuate a little bit, as you saw there, between 50, 60, 70s. What was that? Yeah. 64, 59, 71, 63, 77. Obviously, I stopped on the 24. Obviously, it's going to be heavily dependent on whether or not Explosive Shot crits or not, and as well as any strategist procs. Also, be mindful in that rotation, the Stoke Flames range. So you want to make sure that you're within basically 3 squares, so that it applies the dot. So yes, it's not max range. Like I said, it is a little bit power heavier, so you don't necessarily have to use it. So if you need max range, don't use Stoke, don't clip a Stoke. But it should be, you shouldn't have any power issues within a raid itself. But that's essentially what you're looking at in terms of range. Okay, so on to the fire tank side of the guide. Now, fire tank did see some changing in game update 103. So if I could scroll up here properly. And level 10, so tank roll. The health stayed all the same. Fire soul that you gain now has abilities cost 30% less power. So not that fire tank was heavy in power usage before, but it's just the fact that you're always hitting abilities like backdraft, stoke flames to heal. That they decided to make it abilities cost a little bit of power. So that was helpful. But the main thing is that Fire Soul, you gain 35% defense while not blocking, similar to before. That increases up to 60%. So the counter meter has changed. So let's jump to the sparring targets and show you what the counter actually is now. Okay, so taking a look at our base defense, 73,139. Now, the Fire Soul used to be 25 hits in a combo, which was never realistic as a fire tank. You weren't going to get to 25 in content. Now, with the game update 103, it's down to 5. So the enemy has to be burning. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's the 5th there. And we're up to 85,749. So same thing. If I go, 10, same thing, it's going to stay the same. Same thing, 85,749. So now we reach our maximum defense possible through Fire Soul with only 5 hits, which is super realistic in content. You're always going to be at 5 hits. If it's going to be like in golf, a couple twice, and then backdraft, boom, you're already there. So that's much more realistic to be able to get that hit counter now compared to the 25 before. Okay, so now that you saw what changed, now we're going to dive into the spec. Now, in terms of weapons, ideally you want something that's going to be able to have multiple hits quickly, so you can always get to your 5 really quick. One-handed flurry, staff, there's a bunch of different options. I prefer also one that's going to have a quicker lunge and a pretty good block breaker as well. So that's my preference, is one-handed. You could use really any weapon. It just comes down to preference. But I usually always use one-handed. Just for that faster lunge, but you could use shield too, similar lunges. Just I wouldn't tank with like rifle, I wouldn't tank with like hand blasters or bow, dual pistol, stuff like that. And in terms of super speed, you're going to be wanting to take dash attack and phase dodge. You don't necessarily have to take the movement innates. I do that just because I've got the extra skill points, but it's not 100% required for tank because you have that power reduction already with Fire Soul. It's not necessary. But dash attack and phase dodge are necessary. Iconic powers, you're taking Amazon Deflection and Hard Light Shield. Now in terms of stat points, it's going to be hybrid. This is because you are still going to be using your weapons to keep up your combo, but you do want that 5% dominance and resto, which does help. Because superpowered spec, you don't need it, because once again you have that power generation, plus you're really not that spammy as a fire tank. But you do want the hybrid just for those stats. The 5% dominant resto are going to be beneficial. Now, fire differs from all the other tanks because you max out their critical healing chance and the critical healing magnitude. The other tanks, you just put 10 and 10 to get down. Now, this is where it slightly gets different. Fire tank is still based on health. You still want your max health. It's still a health-based tank in terms of healing received in, as well as the 50% health bonus. So along with rage, you spec health first. I put 150 into restoration. You don't have to do this. Depends on your skill points. You want at least 100. You don't want as much in Dom. The reason why you don't is because you still have all your augments as Dom. So I still have my adaptive augments are Dom. My origin augments are Dom. So you're not going to put resto in these. So the reason why you put Resto in your skill points and not Dom is because you're making up your Dom in your Augments. So depending on your skill points, you definitely want to max out health. That's the priority. And then at least put like 50 or 100 into Restoration and then put just the rest in Dom. That's ideal how you want to spec it, because you're going to make up the Dom easily with those Origin Augments. Because Resto helps fire, but it doesn't scale well enough to be able to warrant running Augments. So in terms of an actual gear spec, you're always going to have Absorption Adapter, Head Mod, whatever supercharge you're running. If you're running Acrobatics, it'd be Perfect Poise. Super Speed would be Dash, not Speed Drain. Whoops, that is going to be Dash Attack. Oh, excuse that little whoops. I went by it, didn't I? There it is. So that's a little typo. Neck mod's going to be Fortified Assault. Back mod, you do want Accelerated Stoke Flames for this one. Chest mod, Hardy for the 5% increase. Leg mod, don't worry about it, nothing scales. In terms of your utility belt, this may differ as well. If it's going to be any kind of fight with ads like hallways, you do want chronomatic emitters for your CC, because fire, really the only CC you have is Backdraft, and that's really just a knockdown because it's going to pull them together, so you got nothing that stuns. So chronomatic emitters are a must. I personally run the breakout trinket. That's just my preference, but I always run it because I don't run breakouts in any of my tank roadouts anymore. Fire tank trinket just for the health bonus, but same thing, you could sub in supply if you don't want to use the trinket, whatever. Same thing with this. If you don't want to use the breakout trinket, you can sub it out, but I find this more helpful than not. And then just an orbital strike. Once you use your orbital, you could sub in a pet, you can sub in supply drops, whatever you'd like to do. There's not really any pets that benefit from tanking. It's just for a little bit extra damage. But if it's a boss fight, obviously I wouldn't use chronomatic emitters. I would switch that out for like a pet just to do some extra damage, like a crystal turret. Or Heartthrob gives you 5% health. That's not bad as well, so you can use that for a boss fight. Hand mod's going to be max damage. Foot mod's going to be Tumbling Mastery. Now in terms of artifacts, Manacles is going to be the 100% option. And Mystic of the Symbol of the 7 is going to be 100% option, just with the extra healing you're going to get from it. With the stacking the extra restoration, you get some nice bonus heals with Mystic. Now the third one, I'm not always expecting you to run this because this artifact just came out with this DLC, so I'm not expecting everyone to have it leveled up to 200. It is an artifact that is beneficial for fire, so I would get it if I was fire and start to level it up. But it's not as beneficial as some of the other tanks. Like you can run Distal Refractor if you want, if you still have that leveled. You could run Gemini if you want to spam Supercharge and have Caster's Watch. You can do that. I prefer the Everyman just because how we'll get into the loadout and how fire tanking actually works now. I feel that the Everyman benefits more and has more uptime. Like the thing with Gemini is that Gemini doesn't have 100% uptime. It's just whenever you hit a shield. So unless you're popping Dash Attack or Perfect Poise every 30 seconds, no matter what, you're not getting all the benefit from Gemini because you're not getting those extra stats. You're not helping out the other players. So it doesn't have 100% uptime. The same thing, Refractor pretty much has 100% uptime with the pull, but really the pull health increase is not that much anymore. It's like 9, 10k, something like that. Maybe a bit more that our Dom's higher. But it's not that good of an increase. Everyman, yes, it doesn't always have 100% uptime, but I'm going to refer to it in the loadout as well. So it's just one of those artifacts where don't rush out and get it. It's not worth it. It's not like Manacles where it's like, oh my god, you have to have it. It's just an artifact that's handy for fire. So just work towards getting it, but it's absolutely not necessary. So in terms of loadout, we have Engulf, which is going to be on there regardless. Backdraft, which is going to be on there regardless. It's your best heal, 3 seconds. A little bit of CC, knocks down enemies in a pull. I run Stoke Flames, which takes advantage of the restoration. So Burning Determination, it's not worth it. 18 seconds. You can only get healed up to 10 times. So if there's multiple 10 hits or you're getting hit by a bunch of ads during the boss fight, you get heals on those rather than the boss hits. And the healing ticks are much lower than Stoke Flames anyway, and so it's just not as beneficial. So it's just a waste to run both. Immolation is going to be the shield. Immolation saw a change as well in Game Update 103. So now it basically instead of being 100% absorption, the value, basically how much damage it can take before it breaks, increases, but it's only 35% damage that is absorbed. So that's why you run Hard Light Shield and Dash Attack to kind of level off the shields. Hard Light Shield's pretty much a must. Dash Attack, not necessarily. If you don't want to run a Supercharge, you could run like Amazon Deflection, you could run Phase Dodge. It's going to be dependent on the situation. Because you're not running Gemini, or at least I don't run Gemini's Fire, you have some options. So depending on what the boss fight is, you can sub out any number of abilities, but Hard Light Shield is going to be a must in there. So the reason why Everyman is helpful with Immolation is because Immolation, because it only takes 35% damage, you are constantly taking damage through Immolation. So don't think of it as a shield, think of it as an extra layer of mitigation. So the way you have that is that since you're taking a lot of damage through Immolation, your health is always going to dip a little bit. So when your health dips a bit, you're going to proc that Everyman, so that health is going to get converted. So your health is already high because you're a fire tank. So now you get 4%, 9%, and 12% of that max health converted to defense. So you still have that mitigation up the entire time, or pretty much the entire time, depending until it breaks or what the fight is with Immolation. And you're getting damage through that, which procs your Everyman. So then you always have pretty much 100% uptime with your Everyman, or the potential to have 100% uptime. So I know that was kind of a lot to take in. So let's kind of jump and show the rotation down here. Okay, so what I mean about Immolation. So if we go up here to the pool, I'm going to hit a Hard Light Shield. Hard Light Shield is 100% absorption. So all the damage that the Spore is dealing to me, I am taking through that. And now when it breaks, I'm taking damage. So let's kind of get up healed here. So just with a couple of backdrafts and one Stoke Flames, I'm pretty much already back up to full health. 50k crit with backdraft. That's why you're on Restoration. But so let's go back into the pool here. Popping Immolation. So I'm absorbing about 10k and I'm still taking 18k worth of damage, but it's lasting a lot longer the entire time. So you still take damage through it, so you still have to mitigate that damage, but it's basically just like an extra layer of mitigation. So that's how you have to look at it. So what that means is that now with your rotation is that you always want to have Immolation off cooldown. So you can't think of Immolation like a shield anymore. You just have to think of it as mitigation. So if if the boss is about to hit you, or you're about to take a big attack, like say you're in Phoenix Cannon Lady Blackhawk Elite, and she charges you, and you're like, okay, I can't block in time, I'm going to pop a shield for the tornadoes. You can't pop Immolation because it's not going to be 100% absorption. You're still going to take damage through that, and more than likely you're going to die unless you catch a orb heal or something like that, or a Page of Destiny proc. So what you have to do is always have Immolation active. So you always have Immolation active for the mitigation, and then you can pop like an extra shield. So then you have that damage through that. So if Hard Light Shield breaks, you still have the mitigated damage being absorbed. And then you can go back into your heals. And then it's off cooldown, so you mitigate it again. So at least now you're taking lower damage, so now your heals are going to matter a bit more. So it's just, you're going to have to get used to now having Immolation on cooldown, because it should, unless you're taking a lot of damage in, Immolation's damage and mitigation should last pretty much almost all of its cooldown to about 60 or 70% of it. So then that's where Manacle comes in handy, because Manacles, if you take too much damage and it spikes, it's going to reset. So you can go right back into Immolation and have that on cooldown. So say fights like doing Clock Tower Elite when you're fighting the first boss with the two sub-bosses. So if they're going to Frenzy, something like that, you can always have Immolation active for all of Frenzy, so to have that lower mitigation. And if you're taking too much damage, you can shield up again or run like a Supercharge. It buys not only you more time, but the healers more time, because you're taking less damage. So you have the Manacle itself proccing the damage, so you're taking 50% less damage, and then you can have that even more by 35% running Immolation. So it's just, you just have to get out of the habit of leaving Immolation as a shield. Just think of it as another mitigation power. So 18 seconds, and just making sure that You're using it not like you want to use it off cooldown, not necessarily, but if you're a whole bunch of ad fights or a boss fight, yes, you want to have it off cooldown. You don't want to save it for those oh shit moments, because it's not going to save you for that. That's why you run Supercharge and Hard Light Shield for those oh shit moments. Immolation is more just an extra layer of mitigation on top of everything else.